Did you know there's a city built on 7 hills, ruling the known world for over 1,000 years? And yet its laws, language, and architecture still directly influence our lives today. A civilization that began as a small village of shepherds on the banks of the Tiber River and grew into the greatest empire in ancient history. Today you'll discover how Rome grew from an insignificant village to the capital of the world, the secrets behind its unstoppable expansion, and why, even after its fall, the Roman legacy still pulsates in every aspect of modern society. This is the complete history of ancient Rome, from its mythical origins to the end of the Western Roman Empire, an epic journey of conquest, betrayal, glory, and decline that forever changed the course of humanity. If you want to discover all the secrets of this fascinating civilization, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment about the time you watch this video. Now let's embark on this extraordinary journey through the centuries. Our story begins long before Rome became the Colossus we know. On the Italian peninsula in the 8th century BC, dozens of tribes fought over territory and resources. Among these tribes were the Latins, who settled in the Lazio region on the banks of the Tiber River. It was a strategic location at the crossroads of important land and river trade routes. But no one could have imagined that from it would emerge the greatest empire of antiquity. The founding of Rome is shrouded in legends that blend myth and reality in a fascinating way. According to Roman tradition, it all began with Aeneas, a Trojan prince who fled the destruction of Troy carrying his father on his back. After a long journey across the Mediterranean, masterfully described by Virgil in the Aeneid, Aeneas arrived in Latium and married Lavinia, daughter of the local king. Their descendants founded the city of Alba Longa, from which the twins Romulus and Remus originated. The story of the twins is one of the best known in Western mythology. Children of the god Mars and Rhea Silvia, they were abandoned on the banks of the Tiber by order of their great-uncle, who feared losing his throne. A she-wolf found them and nursed them in a cave on the Palatine Hill, until a shepherd named Faustulus adopted them. When they grew up, the brothers decided to found a city on the site where they were rescued, but disagreed over where exactly to build it and who would rule it. Romulus drew a sacred furrow delimiting their future city and swore to kill anyone who crossed it. Remus, in defiance, jumped over the line and was killed by his brother. Thus, in 753 BC, Romulus became the first king of Rome. But beyond the legend, archaeology reveals an equally fascinating reality. Excavations on the Palatine Hill have uncovered evidence of settlements dating back to the 8th century BC, partially confirming the Roman tradition. Rome was indeed born from the merger of several villages built on 7 hills: the Palatine, Capitoline, Aventini, Celian, Esquiline, Viminal, and Quirinal, which gradually unified into a single urban community. The first centuries of Rome were ruled by a monarchy that lasted about 250 years. After Romulus, 6 other kings came, each leaving their mark on the young city. Numa Pompilius established religious traditions, and the Roman calendar, Tullius Hostilius, expanded the territory through military conquests. Ancus Marcius built Rome's first port at Ostia, connecting the city to the sea. But it was the last 3 kings who truly transformed Rome into a regional power. Tarquinius Priscus, the first Etruscan king, brought to Rome the sophisticated building techniques and social organization of the Etruscans, a people who dominated central Italy. He built the Circus Maximus, drained the marshes between the hills to create the Roman Forum, and laid the foundations for future Roman architectural greatness. His successor, Servius Tullius, completely reorganized Roman society, creating a class system based on wealth rather than family origin, and built the city's first defensive walls. Known as the Servian Walls, the last king, Tarquinius the Superbus, was a brutal tyrant whose cruelty and arrogance sparked a revolt that would forever change the fate of Rome. In 509 BC, Roman patricians, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, expelled Tarquinius and established a new system of government, the Roman Republic. It was the beginning of one of the most influential political experiments in human history. The word republic comes from the Latin res publica, meaning public matter. The Romans created a system where power did not belong to a single man, but was divided among several institutions. At the top were the consuls, elected annually by the people, who shared executive power and commanded the armies. The Senate, composed of the most experienced patricians, had authority over foreign policy and finances. Several other magistracies, such as praetors, quaestors, and aediles, were responsible for the administration of justice, finances, and public order. But the Republic was born in crisis. Tarquin did not accept his expulsion and sought help from the Etruscan kings to reconquer Rome. The ensuing war was decisive. At the Battle of Lake Regillus, the Republican forces definitively defeated the Royalist coalition. According to legend, the twin gods Castor and Pollux themselves fought alongside the Romans. The victory consolidated the Republic and marked the beginning of Roman expansion across the Italian peninsula. In the following centuries, Rome faced a series of conflicts that tested its resilience and shaped its military character. The wars against the Volsci, Aequi, and Sabines taught the Romans the art of war and the importance of military discipline. But the most significant confrontation was with the powerful Etruscan city of Veii, which controlled the north bank of the Tiber. After a 10-year siege, compared by the Romans themselves to the siege of Troy, Veii fell in 396 BC. The victory doubled Roman territory and provided essential resources for future expansion. However, the young Republic's greatest test was yet to come. In 390 BC, a horde of Gallic warriors led by Brennus descended from the Alps and marched against Rome. At the Allia River, the Roman army suffered a humiliating defeat. The Gauls sacked the lower city, while the survivors took refuge in the Capitoline citadel. For months, Rome withstood the siege, until the Gauls accepted a ransom and gold to leave. When Brennus placed his sword on the scales to increase the weight of the gold, he is said to have uttered the famous phrase "Vi victis," woe to the vanquished. The Gallic humiliation left a deep mark on the Roman psyche and reinforced their determination to never again allow enemies to reach the gates of Rome. The Welsh invasion also accelerated important internal reforms. Tensions between patricians and plebeians, which had been growing since the beginning of the Republic, exploded into a series of conflicts known as the struggle of the orders. The plebeians, who formed the majority of the population and provided the basis of the army, demanded greater political participation and legal protection. Through military strikes and retreats to the Sacred Mount, they secured important concessions. The laws of the 12 Tables, promulgated around 450 BC, were Rome's first written code of laws, ensuring greater judicial transparency. The creation of the plebeian tribunate gave the plebeians' representatives veto power over decisions that harmed them. Gradually, the Roman constitution became more inclusive. In 367 BC, plebeians gained the right to become consuls. In 187, the Lex Hortensia established that the decisions of the plebeian assembly would have the force of law for all citizens. This process of social integration was fundamental to Roman success, as it created a cohesive society where all citizens had a stake in Rome's prosperity and expansion. While resolving its internal problems, Rome continued its expansion throughout Italy. The Roman strategy was brilliant in its simplicity: defeat enemies militarily, but then integrate them into the Roman system through advantageous alliances. Some cities received full Roman citizenship, others became allies with limited rights, but all benefited from Roman protection and trade. This policy created a network of loyalties that provided soldiers and resources for new conquests. The greatest test of this strategy came with the Samnite Wars, 3 brutal conflicts that lasted nearly 50 years between 343 and 90 BC. The Samnites were fierce mountain warriors who dominated south-central Italy. At the Battle of the Caudine Forks in 321, they managed to surround an entire Roman army and force the soldiers to submit under a barrage of spears in a humiliating surrender. But the Romans learned from their defeat, adapted their tactics, and eventually prevailed. The final victory over the Samnites paved the way for the conquest of the entire Italian peninsula. In 280 BC, Rome faced its first confrontation with the Greek whirlwind Pyrrhus, king of Epirus. landed in Italy to aid the Greek city of Tarentum. Pyrrhus was considered one of the finest generals of his time, a cousin of Alexander the Great, and brought something the Romans had never encountered: war elephants. At the battles of Heraclea and Ascalon, Pyrrhus's troops won, but at the cost of terrible losses, giving rise to the expression Pyrrhic victory. When one of his generals congratulated him on the victory at Ascalon, Pyrrhus reportedly replied, "One more victory like that and we're lost." Eventually, without reinforcements and facing Roman tenacity, Pyrrhus abandoned Italy. Into 70 BC, Tarentum fell and Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula south of the Rubicon River. But the true test of the Roman Republic was yet to come on the other side of the Mediterranean. Carthage was a trading power established by the Phoenicians in North Africa, which had controlled Mediterranean trade for centuries, with colonies in Spain, Sicily, and Corsica. Carthage possessed the largest navy in the world and immense wealth derived from trade. Conflict between the two emerging powers was inevitable. The Punic Wars, so named because the Romans called the Carthaginians Puni, were a series of 3 conflicts lasting over a century and determining which civilization would dominate the Mediterranean world. The first war began in 264 BC when Rome intervened in Sicily to aid the Mamertines against Syracuse and Carthage. It was the first time Rome had fought beyond the Italian peninsula, and they quickly realized they would need a navy to challenge Carthage. The Romans demonstrated their adaptive genius by building an entire fleet in just 60 days, copying a captured Carthaginian ship. But their true innovation was the corvus, a movable bridge with grappling hooks that allowed legionaries to board enemy ships and fight as if they were on land. At the battles of Mylae and Ecnomo, the new Roman navy defeated the experienced Carthaginian admirals. The war lasted 23 years, with alternating victories and defeats, until in 41 BC, Carthage surrendered, ceding Sicily to Rome. It was the first Roman province outside Italy. During the lull between wars, Carthage rebuilt itself by conquering territories in Spain under the leadership of the Barca family. Hamilcar Barca, the general who had resisted the Romans in Sicily, swore eternal hatred of Rome and passed this hatred on to his son Hannibal, who would become the greatest enemy Rome ever faced. In 218 BC, Hannibal launched the Second Punic War with one of the most audacious military campaigns in history. He marched from Spain across the Pyrenees, crossed the Alps with an army of 90,000 men and 37 war elephants, and descended upon Italy like a thunderbolt. Hannibal's military genius was unparalleled. At the Tiber River, Lake Trasimene, and especially at Cannae, he destroyed Roman army after army using revolutionary tactics. At Cannae in 16 BC, Hannibal executed the perfect military maneuver. He feigned a retreat in the center, lured the Roman legions into a trap, and encircled them from the flanks in a double pincer attack that annihilated 80,000 Roman soldiers, including 80 senators. It was one of the worst military defeats in Roman history. Rome was on the verge of collapse. Many Italian cities revolted and joined Hannibal. Capua, Italy's second largest city, opened its gates to the Carthaginian general. Philip V of Macedon formed an alliance with Carthage against Rome. It seemed the young republic would not survive Hannibal's hurricane. But it was precisely at this moment of greatest crisis that Rome demonstrated the qualities that would make it master of the world. Instead of seeking peace, the Roman Senate refused to negotiate with Hannibal while he was on Italian soil. Fabius Maximus developed a strategy of avoiding direct battle, constantly harassing the enemy and cutting off their supply lines, earning the nickname Cunctator, the procrastinator. This war of attrition began to wear down the Carthaginian army. Simultaneously, Rome opened other fronts. Publius Cornelius Scipio attacked the Carthaginian holdings in Spain, conquering Carthage Nova and cutting off the reinforcements Hannibal desperately needed. When Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal, finally managed to cross the Alps with a second army, he was intercepted and killed at the Battle of the Metaurus River. Hasdrubal's head was thrown into Hannibal's camp, and Hannibal reportedly remarked, "Now I see the fate of Carthage." In 104 BC, Scipio, now called Africanus, landed in Africa itself. forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal to defend the homeland. In 102, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio definitively defeated Hannibal, using the enemy's own tactics against him. Carthage surrendered unconditionally, losing its navy and colonies, and paying a massive indemnity. Hannibal fled into exile, but the specter of his invasion would haunt Rome forever. The victory over Hannibal transformed Rome from a regional Italian power into a Mediterranean superpower. But success brought new challenges. Rome now controlled territories too vast to be governed by the traditional city-state system. Provincial administration created unprecedented opportunities for Roman magistrates to enrich themselves, leading to growing corruption and inequality. The social consequences were profound. Small farmers, who formed the backbone of the Roman army, had lost their lands during the long military campaigns. Large estates worked by slaves replaced family farming. Masses of impoverished peasants migrated to Rome, creating an urban plebs dependent on free wheat distributions. The very social structure that had made Rome great was crumbling. It was in this context that the Gracchus brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, emerged, attempting agrarian reforms to redistribute public land to poor citizens. Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus was elected tribune of the plebs in 133 BC and proposed limits on public land ownership. When the Senate opposed this, he sought direct approval from the popular assembly, breaking centuries-old constitutional traditions. The political crisis culminated when Tiberius attempted re-election, violating the law prohibiting consecutive terms. A group of senators led by the Pontifex Maximus attacked Tiberius and his supporters, killing 300 men in the first mass political violence in the history of the Republic. 10 years later, Gaius Gracchus followed in his brother's footsteps, proposing even more radical reforms, including wheat subsidies for the urban plebs and the extension of citizenship to Latin allies. His death, along with 3,000 supporters, marked the end of the Gracchus reforms, but the tensions they exposed would continue to corrode the Republic. While Rome struggled with internal problems, its external expansion continued. In the east, a series of Macedonian wars destroyed what remained of Alexander the Great's empire. The Battle of Pydna in 168 BC eliminated Macedonia as an independent power. Antiochus III of Syria was defeated at Magnesia. The kingdom of Pergamum was bequeathed to Rome by its last king. Gradually, the entire eastern Mediterranean fell under Roman rule. In the west, the Roman obsession with Carthage culminated in the Third Punic War. Marcus Porcius Cato ended all his speeches in the Senate with the phrase "Carthage must be destroyed," regardless of the issue at hand. In 149 BC, Rome found a pretext to attack Carthage again. After a 3-year siege, Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, completely destroyed the city. According to Polybius, who witnessed the events, Scipio wept as he watched the flames consume Carthage, reminding himself that one day Rome might suffer the same fate. The ground was richly salted to prevent anything from growing there. It was the end of a rivalry lasting nearly 2 centuries. The destruction of Carthage in 146 BC coincided with the destruction of Corinth that same year, symbolically marking Roman domination over the entire Mediterranean. But the conquests brought unexpected consequences. The wealth of the provinces corrupted the governors. The influx of slaves destroyed free labor. Greek culture seduced the Roman elite, generating an identity crisis. As Horace observed, captive Greece captured its barbarian conqueror. The Republic's problems intensified in the 1st century BC. The social war of 91 to 88 AD erupted when the Italian allies demanded Roman citizenship. After 3 years of brutal warfare, Rome granted citizenship to all free inhabitants of Italy south of the Po River. But the precedent of using military force to resolve political disputes was set. Almost simultaneously, Rome faced its first external existential threat since Hannibal. Mithridates VI of Pontus, a brilliant and ruthless Hellenistic king, orchestrated a simultaneous massacre of all Roman citizens in Asia Minor in 88 BC. In a single day, 80,000 Romans, in italics, were killed. Mithridates invaded Greece and was welcomed as a liberator from Roman rule. The external crisis intertwined with an internal political crisis when the consul Sulpicius proposed transferring command against Mithridates from Sulla. The consul-elect, to Marius, the hero of the Cimmebrian Wars, Sulla responded by marching his legions against Rome, the first time in history that a Roman general had attacked his own city. After briefly occupying Rome, Sulla departed east to confront Mithridates, but left behind a deeply divided republic. During Sulla's absence, Marius and Cinna seized control of Rome and began a bloody purge of their political enemies. When Sulla returned victorious from the east in 80 BC, he found Rome in the hands of his adversaries. The ensuing civil war was one of the most brutal in Roman history. Sulla won the Battle of the Collina Gate and proclaimed himself dictator with unlimited powers to reorganize the republic. Sulla's dictatorship lasted 3 years and permanently transformed Roman politics. His proscription lists condemned thousands of citizens to death, confiscating their property to reward loyal veterans. The young Julius Caesar narrowly escaped execution due to his family connection to Marius when Sulla voluntarily abdicated the dictatorship in 79 BC and retired to his villa. He set a dangerous precedent. A victorious general could seize power by force and rewrite the laws of Rome. Sulla's constitutional reforms attempted to strengthen the Senate and limit the power of the tribunes of the plebs, but were quickly dismantled by his successors. The republic was irretrievably broken, but it would be nearly 50 years before anyone had the courage and power to finally bury it. The final years of the republic were dominated by a series of ambitious generals who discovered that victorious armies were more effective than senatorial debates in achieving political goals. Pompey Magnus gained fame by suppressing Sertorius's rebellion in Spain and Spartacus's slave revolt in Italy. His eastern campaigns against pirates and Mithridates made him the richest and most famous Roman of his time. Meanwhile, Marcus Licinius Crassus amassed an immense fortune through real estate, speculation, and loans, while Julius Caesar rose rapidly through the ranks through a combination of charisma, intelligence, and massive debt. In 60 BC, the three men formed a secret alliance known to historians as the First Triumvirate. Dividing the Roman world between them, Caesar was given the governorship of Gaul, where he spent 8 years conquering territories equivalent to France, Belgium, and parts of modern-day Germany and Switzerland. His Gallic Wars were a masterpiece of military strategy and political propaganda. Caesar not only subjugated dozens of Celtic tribes, but also documented his campaigns in the third person, creating one of the most influential literary works in Roman history. The climax of the Gallic Wars was the Siege of Alasia in 50 BC, where Caesar faced a Gallic coalition led by Vercingetorix, a charismatic Arverni leader who nearly expelled the Romans from Gaul. Caesar surrounded Alasia with 2 concentric walls, one to prevent the besieged from leaving and the other to protect himself from a relief army. When 80,000 Gallic warriors attacked simultaneously from inside and outside the fortifications, Caesar was literally fighting on 2 fronts. His victory definitively broke Gallic resistance and established the Rhine frontiers that would last for centuries. But Caesar's military success worried his rivals in Rome. Crassus had died disastrously attempting to conquer Parthia, leaving only Pompey as a counterbalance to Caesar's growing power. When the Senate ordered Caesar to disband his armies and return to Rome as a private citizen, he refused. In 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his legions, uttering the words that would echo through history: Alia iacta estate, the die is cast. The civil war between Caesar and Pompey tore the Roman world apart. Caesar won quickly in Italy, pursued Pompey into Greece, and decisively defeated him at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated by courtiers who hoped to curry Caesar's favor, but in fact horrified the conqueror with their treachery. Caesar spent the next few years consolidating his power through a series of campaigns that took him to Egypt, where he became romantically involved with Cleopatra, to Asia Minor, where he defeated Pharnaces at the Battle of Zela and sent the famous report Veni, Vidi, Vici to the Senate, and finally to Africa and Spain to eliminate the last pockets of republican resistance. Back in Rome, Caesar became dictator for life and embarked on an ambitious program of reforms. He reorganized the calendar, creating the Julian year of 365 days, founded colonies for veterans, extended Roman citizenship, planned massive public works, and prepared a campaign against Parthia to avenge Crassus' death. But his reforms, and especially his increasing autocratization, alarmed many senators, who saw him as a terminal threat to the Republic. On March 15, 44 BC, on the Ides of March that a seer had prophesied would be fatal, Caesar was assassinated in Pompey's Curia by a conspiracy of senators led by Brutus and Cassius. According to Suetonius, upon seeing Brutus among his assassins, Caesar muttered, "Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus," before falling dead at the foot of Pompey's statue. Pierced by 23 stab wounds, the conspirators hoped that Caesar's death would restore the Republic, but they completely underestimated the forces they had unleashed. The Roman people, especially the veterans and urban plebs, adored Caesar and were furious at his assassination. Mark Antony, Caesar's consul and lieutenant, galvanized the crowd at the funeral with a speech that Shakespeare would immortalize. Centuries later, the conspirators were forced to flee Rome, but the biggest surprise came from an unexpected source. Octavius, Caesar's 18-year-old grandnephew, arrived in Rome claiming his inheritance. Caesar had posthumously adopted him in his will, officially making him Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. Despite his young age, Octavius demonstrated precocious political skill, recruiting Caesar's veterans and forcing the Senate to recognize him as the legitimate heir. Initially, Antony and Octavian clashed over control of the Caesarian legacy, but pragmatically, they realized they needed to collaborate to defeat Caesar's assassins. In 43 BC, they joined forces with Lepidus, another Caesarian general, to form the Second Triumvirate, an official alliance with dictatorial powers to reorganize the Republic. Their first act was to promulgate proscription lists even bloodier than Sulla's, eliminating 3,000 political opponents, including Cicero, whose Philippics against Antony sealed his fate. In 40 BC, on the plains of Philippi in Macedonia, the triumviral armies faced the Republican forces led by Brutus and Cassius into decisive battles. The Caesarian victory marked the definitive end of the Roman Republic. Brutus and Cassius committed suicide, and Antony is said to have said of Brutus, "He was the only one who killed Caesar for noble reasons." With the Republic dead, the only thing left to decide was who would inherit its corpse. Antony received the East, Octavian the West, and Lepidus Africa. For nearly 10 years, this division maintained a tense peace, but the personalities and ambitions of the two main protagonists made final conflict inevitable. Antony settled in Alexandria with Cleopatra, living as a Hellenistic king and adopting Eastern customs that scandalized Rome. Octavian remained in Italy, carefully cultivating his image as a defender of Roman traditions. Propaganda became a crucial weapon in the Cold War between the two. Octavian portrayed Antony as a traitor who had abandoned Rome for a foreign queen, while Antony accused Octavian of being an inexperienced youth who had usurped Caesar's name. When Antony divorced Octavia, Octavian's sister, to officially marry Cleopatra and recognized the children he had fathered with the Egyptian queen as heirs to the eastern territories, Octavian had the pretext he needed. In 31 BC, the rival fleets clashed at the Battle of Actium in the Ambracian Gulf. Octavian, commanded by his skilled Admiral Agrippa, defeated the Egyptian-Roman alliance of Antony and Cleopatra. When the battle began to turn against them, Cleopatra withdrew her fleet, followed by Antony, who abandoned his own soldiers to accompany the queen. The commander's desertion sealed Octavian's victory and the fate of the last pharaonic dynasty. A year later, Octavian invaded Egypt. Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide to avoid the humiliation of being paraded in the Roman triumph. With the death of his last rivals, Octavian became the sole ruler of the Mediterranean world. The 18-year-old who had come to Rome to claim his inheritance now controlled an empire that stretched from Britain to the Euphrates, from Germany to the Sahara. But Octavius, now 32, faced the same dilemma that had destroyed Caesar: how to govern an empire while maintaining the Republican fiction. that the Romans considered essential to their identity, his solution was a masterpiece of political engineering. In 27 BC, Octavius appeared before the Senate and theatrically returned all his extraordinary powers to the Republic. Declaring himself a simple citizen, the Senate, duly rehearsed, implored him to retain some authority for the good of Rome. Octavius reluctantly accepted the governorship of several provinces for 10 years, along with the honorary title of Augustus the Venerable. This political theater masked a fundamental transformation. Augustus maintained the republican facade, preserving the Senate, the consuls, and all the traditional magistracies, but concentrated real control in his hands through a unique combination of powers. As proconsul of the military provinces, he commanded most of the legions. With lifelong tribunician power, he could veto any decision and propose laws directly to the people. As Pontifex Maximus, he controlled the official religion. Gradually, he accumulated so many titles and honors that it became impossible to challenge him. Within the legal framework, the system created by Augustus, known to historians as the Principate, worked brilliantly for over 2 centuries. He established defensible borders on the Rhine and Danube, professionalized the army by creating the Praetorian Guard to protect the emperor, reorganized the provincial administration, and initiated a program of public works that transformed Rome into a metropolis worthy of a global empire. His famous statement that he found Rome of brick and left it of marble was no mere exaggeration. But perhaps Augustus' greatest achievement was establishing the Pax Romana, a peace that would last 200 years and allow the Mediterranean to experience unprecedented prosperity. Trade flourished between pacified provinces, cities grew, populations increased, and Greco-Roman culture spread from Scotland to Sudan. It was the height of classical civilization. Imperial succession remained problematic throughout the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Augustus outlived for designated heirs before his death in 14 AD, leaving power to his stepson Tiberius, a competent but melancholic general who retired to Capri in the final years of his reign. Caligula, his successor, began well but apparently went mad, proclaiming himself a god and committing excesses that shocked even Roman standards. His own Praetorian Guard assassinated him in 41, elevating his uncle Claudius to power. Claudius surprised everyone by ruling competently for 13 years, conquering Britain and expanding Roman citizenship. His wife, Agrippina, poisoned him to place her son Nero on the throne. Nero began as a promising young man mentored by the philosopher Seneca, but gradually revealed a cruel and megalomaniacal personality. He killed his mother, wife, and half-brother, and when a great fire devastated Rome in 64, rumors accused him of starting the fire to build his Domus Aurea. Nero blamed the Christians, initiating the first official persecution of this new Eastern religion. The revolt that followed in 68 AD marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and nearly the end of the empire itself. In the year of the four emperors, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian struggled for power as provinces rebelled and legions marched against each other. Vespasian, a practical general of humble origins who was suppressing the Jewish revolt, prevailed and founded the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian restored imperial stability and began construction of the Colosseum, which was completed by his son Titus. But it was Trajan, the first emperor born outside Italy in the province of Hispania, who brought Rome to its greatest territorial splendor. Between 101 and 106, his Dacian campaigns added immense gold treasures to the imperial coffers. Between 114 and 117, he conquered Mesopotamia, extending Roman borders to the Persian Gulf. Never in history had an empire controlled so many territories and so many diverse peoples. Hadrian, Trajan's successor, realized that the empire had reached its natural limits and adopted a defensive policy. His Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain symbolized the transition from expansion to consolidation. Hadrian devoted his 21-year reign to traveling through the provinces, strengthening borders, founding cities, and promoting Greco-Roman culture. It was during his reign that the last Jewish revolt, led by Bar Kokhba between 132 and 135, was brutally suppressed, resulting in the definitive dispersion of the Jewish people. The 2nd century AD was truly the golden age of the Roman Empire. Under the Antonini emperors, Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius, Roman civilization reached its cultural and economic peak. Cities like Alexandria, Antioch, Ephesus, and Rome itself were cosmopolitan metropolises with hundreds of thousands of inhabitants. The Roman road system connected territories, from Hadrian's Wall to Aswan, allowing a letter sent from London to reach Jerusalem in less than 40 days. But even at the height of greatness, signs of decline were beginning to appear. Marcus Aurelius's Marcomannic Wars showed that the Germanic tribes were becoming more organized and threatening. The Antonini Plague, possibly smallpox, devastated the empire between 165 and 180, killing up to 5 million people and demographically weakening entire provinces. The rising costs of maintaining the borders strained imperial finances, forcing currency devaluations that generated inflation. The death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 marked the end of the Golden Age and the beginning of what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. His son Commodus ruled as a paranoid tyrant who believed himself the reincarnation of Hercules and fought as a gladiator in the arena. His assassination in 192 sparked another civil war that brought the Severi to power. Septimius Severus, an African general, established a military dynasty that ruled for half a century. His deathbed advice to his sons summed up the new reality: enrich the soldiers and despise everyone else. The army had become the final arbiter of imperial power, and emperors increasingly depended on the purchased loyalty of legionaries. The Antonini Constitution of 212, promulgated by Caracalla, granted Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. This seemingly generous measure had fiscal motivations. More citizens meant more taxpayers to support growing military expenditures. Paradoxically, by universalizing Roman citizenship, the measure diluted its value and meaning. The 3rd century witnessed the near collapse of the imperial system. Between 235 and 284, 50 men claimed the title of emperor, most dying in battle or assassinated by rivals. This period, known as the military anarchy, saw the empire temporarily fragment as Gaul, Hispania, and Britannia separated under the Gallic Empire, while Palmyra controlled the east under Queen Zenobia. Barbarian invasions intensified dramatically. Goths attacked the Balkans and sacked Athens. Alemanni penetrated as far as northern Italy. Franks and Saxons raided the coasts of Gaul and Britain. Sasanian Persians temporarily captured Emperor Valerian, a humiliation unprecedented in Roman history. The economy collapsed due to constant warfare, currency devaluation, and the disruption of trade. Recovery came with Diocletian, a Dalmatian general who came to power in 184 and implemented radical reforms that saved the empire, but completely transformed its nature. Realizing that the empire was too large to be ruled by one person, Diocletian created the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 rulers, to Senior Augusti and to Junior Caesars. Dividing power between East and West, Diocletian's reforms touched every aspect of imperial life. He completely reorganized civil and military administration, separating previously unified careers. He established a fiscal system based on taxes in kind rather than devalued currency. He set maximum prices to curb inflation. Through the famous Edict of Maximum Prices, he relentlessly persecuted Christians in the last and most severe persecution in Roman history. But the Tetrarchy did not survive Diocletian's abdication in 305. A new civil war broke out between rivals for succession, complicated by the emergence of Constantine, son of Constantius Chlorus, one of the Tetrarchs. The decisive battle took place at the Milvian Bridge in 312, where Constantine defeated Maxentius after having a vision of the Christian cross and the words in hoc signo vinces, with this sign, you will conquer. Constantine's conversion to Christianity was one of the most transformative events in world history. The Edict of Milan of 313 legalized Christianity, ending 3 centuries of intermittent persecution. Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 to resolve theological disputes, establishing the imperial role in defining Christian orthodoxy. His new capital, Constantinople, founded in 330 on the site of ancient Byzantium, symbolized the birth of a Christian Roman Empire. Constantinian reforms completed the transformation initiated by Diocletian. The emperor was no longer the princeps, first among equals, but the dominus, absolute lord surrounded by elaborate rituals derived from Eastern monarchies. The old senatorial elite was replaced by a complex imperial bureaucracy based on honorary titles, rather than military or civic merit. After Constantine's death in 337, the empire was divided among his sons, beginning a pattern of divisions and reunifications that weakened central authority. Julian the Apostate briefly attempted to restore paganism between 361 and 363, but died fighting in Parthia. Theodosius I was the last emperor to rule over the entire unified empire. But after his death in 395, the division between East and West became permanent. The 5th century witnessed the final agony of the Western Roman Empire. Barbarian invasions were no longer temporary raids, but mass migrations of entire peoples seeking lands within Roman borders. The Visigoths sacked Rome in 410. The Vandals repeated the feat in 455. The Huns under Attila ravaged the Balkans and Gaul, before being stopped at the Battle of the Catalaunian Fields in 451, one of the last great victories of the Western armies. The empire's ultimate paradox was that its defense increasingly depended on the very barbarians it was supposedly fighting. Generals like Stilicho, Aetius, and Ricimer, all of barbarian origin, commanded the last imperial armies. Barbarian federates received land in exchange for military service, creating semi-independent kingdoms within the imperial territory. In 476, Odoacer, a barbarian general, deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last Western emperor, and sent the imperial insignia to Constantinople, declaring that the West no longer needed an emperor. This marked the formal end of the Western Roman Empire, exactly 1,000 years after the founding of the Republic. But it would be wrong to see 476 as an absolute end. The Eastern Roman Empire continued for nearly 1,000 more years as the Byzantine Empire. Roman law survived in the Code of Justinian. The Latin language evolved into the Romance languages spoken by hundreds of millions of people. The Catholic Church preserved and transmitted much of the Roman cultural heritage. The very concept of empire remained a political ideal for the centuries in the Holy Roman Empire. And its successors. Rome didn't die in 476. It was transformed. Its institutions, laws, language, architecture, literature, and even its political ideals continue to shape Western civilization. Every time a parliament debates a law, when judges apply legal precedents, when engineers build bridges, or when students learn Latin, the spirit of Rome lives on. The history of Rome is fundamentally the history of humanity struggling to organize complex societies, expand geographic and cultural horizons, and create lasting institutions. From shepherds on the 7 hills to emperors ruling 3 continents, Rome demonstrated both the possibilities and the limits of human ambition. Its legacy reminds us that even the greatest empires are human constructs subject to the same weaknesses and contradictions as their creators, but also capable of achievements that echo through the millennia. Perhaps Rome's ultimate lesson is that true immortality lies not in preventing change, but in creating something so fundamental that it transcends its own historical circumstances. Rome fell, but the Roman world never truly ended. It transformed, adapted, and continues to influence our modern lives in ways we barely notice. To truly understand Rome's lasting impact, we need to explore more deeply how this extraordinary civilization functioned in its daily lives, what values motivated its citizens, and how its complex society managed to maintain cohesion for so many centuries. Rome's greatness lay not only in its military achievements or architectural monuments, but in the creation of a social and cultural system that proved remarkably adaptable and resilient. Roman society was fundamentally hierarchical, but with a social mobility that was uncommon in the ancient world. At the top were the patricians, descendants of Rome's founding families, who initially monopolized political and religious offices. Below came the plebeians, who constituted the majority of the free population and ranged from small farmers to wealthy merchants. The freedmen, freed slaves, formed a vital intermediate class for the urban economy. At the base of the pyramid were the slaves, who could range from rural laborers to highly educated secretaries or personal physicians for wealthy families. What made the Roman system unique was its capacity for integration. Unlike other ancient societies that maintained rigid barriers between ethnic groups, Rome developed an extraordinary mechanism of cultural assimilation. Conquered peoples could, over generations, become fully Roman. Spaniards like Trajan and Hadrian became emperors. Greek philosophers educated young Romans. Gallic soldiers defended borders in Britain. This cultural flexibility was one of the keys to Roman imperial success. Daily life in Rome revealed striking contrasts. In the empire's capital, multi-story apartment buildings, called insulae, housed hundreds of thousands of people in conditions ranging from relative luxury on the ground floors to poverty on the upper floors, where the risk of fire was constant and running water was non-existent. Meanwhile, the domus of the wealthy were veritable urban palaces with interior gardens, central heating, and artistic decorations that rivaled modern museums. The Roman educational system produced a remarkable literate elite. Boys from wealthy families studied grammar, rhetoric, and philosophy with often Greek teachers. They learned to deliver speeches, debate legal issues, and memorize vast tracts of classical literature. This system created a sophisticated political culture, where intellectual debate was valued as much as military skill. Cicero, Pliny the Younger, Quintilian, and Tacitus exemplify this Roman intellectual tradition that would profoundly influence the later development of Western education. Roman religion was a complex system that combined ancient traditions with external influences. Traditional gods such as Jupiter, Mars, and Minerva coexisted with Eastern deities such as Mithras, Isis, and eventually Christ. The Romans viewed religion primarily as a contract with the gods. By correctly performing the rituals, they expected divine protection for the city. This pragmatic approach allowed for an unusual religious tolerance, as long as the cults did not threaten public order or loyalty to the state. Roman engineering represented technological advances that would not be surpassed for over 1,000 years in many areas. The aqueduct system that supplied Rome transported water from springs over 100 kilometers away, providing running water for a population that may have reached 1 million. Roman baths were entertainment complexes that combined hot and cold. Baths, gymnasiums, libraries, and gardens, serving as social centers for all classes. The Pantheon, with its unreinforced concrete dome measuring 43 meters in diameter, remained the largest unreinforced concrete structure in the world. Until the 20th century, Roman law is perhaps the most enduring legacy of Roman civilization. The gradual development of Roman jurisprudence, from the 12 Tables to the Code of Justinian, created legal principles that underpin modern legal systems. Concepts such as the presumption of innocence, the right to defense, the distinction between public and private law, and the idea that the law must be written and publicly known are direct legacies of Roman legal thought. Even today, lawyers use Latin terms such as habeas corpus, in loco parentis, and res ipsa loquitur that trace their roots directly to Roman law. The Roman economy was surprisingly sophisticated and integrated. Roman coins circulated from Scotland to India, facilitating international trade on a scale not seen again until the modern era. Roman merchants imported silk from China, spices from India, amber from the Baltic, and ivory from Africa. Rome consumed approximately 400,000 tons of wheat annually, imported primarily from Egypt and North Africa. This globalized economy depended on the security provided by the legions and the infrastructure of roads and ports built by the Roman state. The Roman army was more than a military force. It was an institution of social engineering that transformed peasants of diverse backgrounds into disciplined and technically competent citizens. A typical legionary served for 25 years, learning not only combat skills but also engineering, construction, administration, and often a second language. Veterans were granted land and settled in military colonies that spread Roman culture throughout the empire. This system created a loyal rural middle class that formed the backbone of imperial society. Roman architecture and urbanism established patterns that influence cities to this day. Roman urban planning, with its gridded streets, central forums, aqueducts, sewers, and public buildings, created the model for thousands of cities throughout the empire. Many modern European cities still follow the layout of their Roman predecessors. London, Paris, Cologne, Vienna, and hundreds of other cities were founded or significantly developed by the Romans, and their historic centers often preserve elements of the original Roman planning. Roman literature produced works that remain central to Western education 2,000 years later. Virgil, in the Aeneid, created a national epic that rivaled Homer's, establishing Aeneas as the mythical ancestor of the Romans and connecting Rome to the Trojan heroic cycle. Ovid, in the Metamorphoses, compiled and reinterpreted classical mythology in a way that would influence artists from the Renaissance to the 20th century. Horace developed poetic forms that served as models for poets for centuries. Tacitus wrote histories that remain essential primary sources and examples of analytic prose. Seneca developed a practical Stoic philosophy that influenced Western ethical thought. The Roman contribution to political philosophy is equally fundamental. The Republican idea of a mixed government with executive, legislative, and judicial powers balancing each other directly influenced the founders of the American Republic. The concept of Roman citizenship, which eventually extended to all free inhabitants of the empire, set precedents for modern notions of universal rights. The Roman notion of jus gentium, the law of nations, contributed to the development of modern international law. The Roman economy was surprisingly sophisticated and integrated. Roman coins circulated from Scotland to India, facilitating international trade on a scale not seen again until the modern era. Roman merchants imported silk from China, spices from India, amber from the Baltic, and ivory from Africa. Rome consumed approximately 400,000 tons of wheat annually, imported primarily from Egypt and North Africa. This globalized economy depended on the security provided by the legions and the infrastructure of roads and ports built by the Roman state. The Roman army was more than a military force. It was an institution of social engineering that transformed peasants of diverse backgrounds into disciplined and technically competent citizens. A typical legionary served for 25 years, learning not only combat skills but also engineering, construction, administration, and often a second language. Veterans were granted land and settled in military colonies that spread Roman culture throughout the empire. This system created a loyal rural middle class that formed the backbone of imperial society. Roman architecture and urbanism established patterns that influence cities to this day. Roman urban planning, with its gridded streets, central forums, aqueducts, sewers, and public buildings, created the model for thousands of cities throughout the empire. Many modern European cities still follow the layout of their Roman predecessors. London, Paris, Cologne, Vienna, and hundreds of other cities were founded or significantly developed by the Romans, and their historic centers often preserve elements of the original Roman planning. Roman literature produced works that remain central to Western education 2,000 years later. Virgil, in the Aeneid, created a national epic that rivaled Homer's, establishing Aeneas as the mythical ancestor of the Romans and connecting Rome to the Trojan heroic cycle. Ovid, in the Metamorphoses, compiled and reinterpreted classical mythology in a way that would influence artists from the Renaissance to the 20th century. Horace developed poetic forms that served as models for poets for centuries. Tacitus wrote histories that remain essential primary sources and examples of analytic prose. Seneca developed a practical Stoic philosophy that influenced Western ethical thought. The Roman contribution to political philosophy is equally fundamental. The Republican idea of a mixed government with executive, legislative, and judicial powers balancing each other directly influenced the founders of the American Republic. The concept of Roman citizenship, which eventually extended to all free inhabitants of the empire, set precedents for modern notions of universal rights. The Roman notion of jus gentium, the law of nations, contributed to the development of modern international law. When we examine the decline and fall of the empire, we see a complex process that spanned centuries and had multiple, interconnected causes: demographic pressure from Germanic tribes, driven by climate change, and the pressure of the Huns from the Asian steppes, created a constant migratory pressure on Roman borders. The rising cost of maintaining professional armies across ever-expanding frontiers strained the empire's fiscal base. The gradual loss of the Roman civic ideal, replaced by local or religious loyalties, weakened the social cohesion that had made Roman rule possible. The Christianization of the empire, while providing a new source of cultural unity, also fundamentally altered the nature of Roman civilization. Christian values of humility, charity, and a focus on the afterlife contrasted with traditional Roman ideals of military glory, civic ambition, and national pride. This tension created a new and rich cultural synthesis, but also contributed to the transformation of Roman identity. The division of the empire between East and West, though administratively necessary, weakened imperial authority and created rivalries between the two halves. The East, with its more diversified economy and more populous cities, gradually became dominant, while the West struggled with invasions, economic decline, and political instability. The transfer of the capital to Constantinople symbolized this shift in power from the central to the eastern Mediterranean. But it's crucial to understand that the fall of Rome was more of a transformation than a destruction. The barbarian kingdoms that emerged in the former western provinces maintained many Roman institutions. Roman law continued to be applied under the Visigothic and Burgundian codes. The Latin language evolved, but did not disappear, becoming the basis of the Romance languages. The Catholic Church preserved and transmitted much classical literature and philosophy through its monastic schools. The Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, maintained Roman political continuity for nearly 1,000 more years. Byzantine emperors continued to call themselves Basilius ton Romaian, Emperor of the Romans, and to see themselves as direct heirs of Augustus and Constantine. Byzantium preserved Roman law and the Code of Justinian, maintained the Greek intellectual tradition, and developed a unique synthesis of classical and Christian culture that would profoundly influence the development of Eastern Europe and Russia. During the Middle Ages, the memory of Rome fueled dreams of imperial renewal. Charlemagne was crowned emperor by the popes in 800, beginning a tradition that would culminate in the Holy Roman Empire. The Catholic Church itself was organized along the lines of Roman imperial administration, with the Pope assuming many of the former emperor's functions as Pontifex Maximus. The Renaissance intensively rediscovered classical Roman culture. Humanists such as Petrarch, Boccaccio, and Machiavelli studied ancient Roman texts, seeking models to renew European civilization. Architects such as Brunelleschi and Palladio based their designs on Roman architectural principles. Sculptors such as Donatello and Michelangelo found inspiration in Roman art. This recovery of classical heritage was fundamental to the development of modern culture. The Roman influence on the development of modern political institutions is particularly notable. The American Constitution explicitly incorporated Roman principles such as separation of powers, federalism, and representative government. The American founding fathers read Cicero, Tacitus, and Plutarch and consciously modeled many institutions. On the Roman Republic, the American Senate derives its name directly from the Roman Senate. The system of constitutional checks and balances reflects the Roman ideal of mixed government. The French Revolution also drew inspiration from Roman models. The revolutionaries adopted Roman symbols such as the fasces and the eagle. Robespierre saw himself as a new Cato, defending republican virtue against corruption. Napoleon consciously modeled himself on Caesar and Augustus, culminating in his coronation as emperor. The Napoleonic Code was profoundly influenced by Roman law and spread Roman legal principles throughout Europe and beyond. Even seemingly anti-Roman political movements incorporated elements of Roman tradition. The Holy Roman Empire officially lasted until 1806, maintaining at least the fiction of Roman imperial continuity. Russia adopted the title Caesar as Tsar and saw itself as the Third Rome. After the fall of Constantinople, the title of Kaiser in the German Empire itself derived from Caesar. Rome's linguistic influence is perhaps even more pervasive. Not only do the Romance languages Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, and Romanian descend directly from Latin, but English has incorporated thousands of Latin words through Norman French and later loanwords. Scientific, medical, legal, and academic terminology in general remains largely Latin. When a doctor prescribes medication, a judge pronounces a sentence, or a botanist classifies a plant, they are using vocabulary that traces directly back to Classical Latin. The Roman contribution to modern law goes far beyond vocabulary. Fundamental principles such as the distinction between public and private law, the idea of legal personality, concepts of property and contract, and basic judicial procedures derive from Roman law. The civil law system, used in most of the world, is directly based on the Roman legal tradition, especially as codified by Justinian. Roman engineering and architecture continue to influence modern construction. The Roman use of the arch, vault, and dome influenced European architecture for centuries. Roman concrete, rediscovered in the 18th century, made modern architecture possible. Roman urban planning principles, such as grid streets, functional zoning, and provision of public services, continue to be applied in modern cities. Perhaps most fundamentally, Rome bequeathed to the West a particular vision of civilization based on law, order, and cultural integration. The idea that diverse peoples can be united under common institutions, that law should be universal and rationally applied, and that government should seek the common good, not the individual good, are concepts that Rome developed and that remain central to Western political thought. The very notion of empire as a political system found its most enduring and influential example in Rome. Later empires, from the Carolingian to the British, from the Ottoman to the Soviet, all measured themselves in some way by the Roman standard. The modern European Union, with its combination of cultural diversity and common institutions, echoes in many ways the Roman imperial model of unity and diversity. The Roman intellectual heritage lives on in modern universities. The liberal arts-based educational system, where students first acquire a general education before specializing, derives directly from the Roman educational model. The tradition of public debate, critical textual analysis, and logical argumentation that characterizes Western higher education has deep roots in Roman rhetoric and philosophy. Even in contemporary popular culture, Rome retains a powerful fascination. Films like Gladiator, series like Rome, and countless books and games set in the Roman world show that this ancient civilization continues to capture the modern imagination. The values that Rome represented, glory, honor, civic duty, discipline, and imperial ambition, continue to resonate in cultures that see themselves as heirs to the Western tradition. The ultimate irony is that Rome achieved in death an immortality that eluded it in life. The Roman Empire officially lasted little more than 500 years in the West, but Roman civilization has continued to live and evolve for over 2,000 years. Every time we use the Latin alphabet, apply Roman legal principles, admire neoclassical architecture, or participate in republican institutions, we are perpetuating traditions that began on the 7 hills on the banks of the Tiber. This is, ultimately, Rome's greatest lesson, that true greatness is measured not by the duration of political power, but by the depth and durability of cultural influence. Rome conquered the world twice, first by arms, then by ideas. The second conquest proved far more enduring than the first. As long as Western civilization exists, there will be something fundamentally Roman at its foundation, reminding us that we are all, in some way, children of Rome.